Montana Territory, summer of 1878. The sun had barely cleared the pine ridge when Delaney Lark stumbled barefoot through the brush, her dress torn, her breath ragged, and the icy creek biting at her ankles. She had been robbed. Horse, rifle, money gone. Even her boots had been taken. Two men she thought were decent enough for travel company had turned on her by the second day out of Helena. One had held her arms while the other rifled through her saddlebag. Then they left her by the water, bruised and shaken, with nothing but the thin cotton dress on her back and a cracked canteen they had not bothered to take. She had walked for hours, following the creek, hoping it would lead to something. A road. A farm. A soul who would not hurt her. She stepped wrong on a sharp stone and hissed, crouching to grab her foot. The skin split along the ball of it, blood mixing with the cold runoff. Her hands trembled as she pressed her palm to the wound, trying to breathe through the pain. A soft rustle came from the trees behind her. She looked up fast, heart hammering. A man stood there, tall and quiet, part shadowed by the spruce. He wore leggings and a faded blue army coat over a buckskin shirt. His black hair was braided down his back, and a rifle was slung over his shoulder, but his hands were empty. She didn't run. Couldn't. Her legs were too tired and her feet too torn up. "You hurt?" he asked, voice steady and low. She blinked at him, unsure if he was real. "Who are you?" "My name is Soren Littlehawk." She didn't answer, just stared at him, still crouched in the water like some broken thing. He stepped forward, slow. "I am Cheyenne. I do not care what you are," she said, voice cracking. "Unless you are here to hurt me." "I am not," he said simply. "You are bleeding." She looked down. The cut had gotten worse. The water was red around her toes. "May I see?" She hesitated, then nodded. He moved closer, kneeling without a sound. His hands were large but careful as he lifted her foot out of the water. She watched him examine the gash, his eyes focused. "You need to get off this foot," he said. "There is a wide crossing up ahead." "I will take you." "I can walk," she said quickly. "You cannot. You will tear it more." She bit her lip, pride warring with sense. Then she nodded. He looped his rifle over his back, scooped her into his arms with practiced ease, and stepped into the current. The creek was deeper than she thought. His legs vanished to the knee, then the thigh. The water rushed loud around them, pulling at his coat. She wrapped her arms around his neck, heart pounding. He held her steady, strong as a mountain. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. "Because you need help." She studied his face. He was younger than she expected, maybe early 30s, but his eyes were older than that. Steady. Watchful. "What were you doing out here?" "Hunting. I scout for the army sometimes. They pay, when they feel like it." She nodded slowly. "I was headed to Fort Benton. My brother was supposed to meet me. He never came. I thought I could make it on my own." His jaw tightened. "Those men who robbed you, did they follow?" "No. I walked away fast as I could. I do not think they cared." "They always care," he said, voice low. "But they are cowards." They would not come this close to Cheyenne land. The creek narrowed as he climbed out the far side, water dripping off him. He carried her up the bank like she weighed nothing, then set her down gently on a dry patch of moss. "Stay here," he said. "I will make a fire. You need warmth." She watched him gather wood with practiced ease. He moved like a man used to silence, to forests, to danger. His hands were quick and sure, striking flint, feeding flame. When the fire caught, he took off his coat and laid it over her shoulders. Delaney pulled it tight. It still held his warmth. He sat across from her, legs crossed, his eyes steady on hers. "What is your name?" "Delaney Lark." "Where are you from?" "Nebraska. I came west after my mother died. There was nothing left there for me." "You have family?" "Not anymore." He nodded once. "Then you are like me." She looked at him. You have no family? My wife and son were taken in the Sand Creek raid. I was away. By the time I came back. He stopped. His eyes flicked to the fire. I buried what was left. Her throat closed. I am sorry. He gave a slow nod but said nothing. The silence stretched between them, not heavy, just there. After a while she said, Thank you? For helping me. He looked at her then, really looked. You are brave. I see it. She didn't know how to answer that, so she just pulled the coat tighter and let the fire warm her feet. They stayed by the creek that night. He gave her dried meat and his last strip of cornbread. When she offered to take the cold side of the fire, he shook his head and wrapped her in his blanket. She slept dreamless for the first time in days. By morning, her foot was swollen, but she could walk short distances. He cut strips from the lining of his coat and wrapped her foot tight. Then he offered her a choice. I can take you to Fort Benton, he said. Or I can take you to my camp. I have food, shelter. She looked up at him, hair tangled, eyes tired. Would you mind if I stayed with you a little while? He shook his head. I would not mind. And just like that, they walked north together, side by side along the creek. He moved slow for her. When she stumbled, he steadied her. When she flinched at birds in the brush, he said nothing, just stayed close. She found herself watching the way he moved, the way he listened to the land. She had never known a man like him. That night, when he made camp again, she sat beside him near the fire and asked, Do you always help strangers? No, he said, not looking away from the flames. Only the ones who matter. She felt her cheeks go hot, but she did not look away either. Something had shifted. And neither of them wanted it to shift back. The trail wound through lodgepole and aspen, narrowing where the ground pinched between stone outcroppings. Delaney stepped lightly, her weight favoring the wrapped foot, though the pain still flared when she misjudged a root or hidden dip. Soren walked a few paces ahead, brush parting soundlessly before him. He paused now and then to scan the land, reading it in a way she couldn't begin to understand. By mid-morning, they reached a ridge where the trees opened. Below stretched a long sweep of valley, quiet and green, with willows gathered along a distant stream. A lean shelter stood near the edge of the trees, a low construct of pine poles and hide, the smoke hole dark and still. He gestured toward it. That is home for now. She eased herself down onto a flat stone, the weight finally too much. Do you stay here alone? He nodded. Since spring. There's a trapline east of here. I check it at dawn. She studied the slope, the small shelter, the simple outline of his life. It's quiet. That's the point. She rested her elbows on her knees, looking out across the valley. I never knew silence could feel like a thing you drink. He glanced at her, then knelt to unlace a rawhide pouch. From it, he pulled a small tin of salve. You've walked enough for today. She didn't argue. When he reached for her foot, she stiffened before forcing herself still. He didn't look up, just peeled back the cloth with care. The wound was angry now, edges puffed and red. This will burn, he said. She nodded once, jaw tight. The salve seared like fire before it dulled into a deep ache. He didn't speak while he worked, and neither did she. The wind stirred the grass in slow waves, the only sound between them. When he finished, he wrapped her foot again with clean strips and set it carefully on a flat stone to keep the swelling down. Then he stood and went to gather wood, his movements quiet as always. By the time a fire crackled near the shelter, she had shifted to sit beside it, her shoulders wrapped in a faded wool blanket he'd left for her. He handed her a tin cup half filled with warm broth. It's from rabbit, he said. Caught 2 days ago. She took it, fingers brushing his. Thank you. He crouched beside the fire, warmed his hands, and looked toward the trees. There's a man rides through this valley sometimes. Red beard, black gelding. Seen him twice this week. Her stomach tightened. Could be one of them. He didn't nod, but his eyes narrowed. If he comes near, he won't leave with anything he didn't bring. She stared into the flames, then glanced at him. Do you always watch the land like that? He gave a small shrug. It tells more than most men do. I never learned to read anything but books. You had learning? My mother taught in a prairie town. She made me sit through all her lessons before I was old enough to argue. He tilted his head. You liked it? I liked knowing how things worked. She hesitated. But I don't think it helped me much when I was on the trail alone. It got you here, he said. That's not nothing. She looked at him then, really looked. The set of his shoulders, the scar that curved beneath his jaw, the steady way he held her gaze. You don't speak much. But when you do, you mean it. Words weigh more if you carry them quiet. A slow breath left her. I'm tired of being afraid. He didn't tell her not to be. Instead, he reached behind him and pulled something from a wrapped bundle, a smooth-handled knife in a worn leather sheath. He held it out. Keep this close. She took it without speaking. The balance of it felt right in her hand. Later, when the sun dipped behind the ridge and the air cooled, he hung a pot over the fire and stirred in dried beans and wild onion. She watched the flames catch red in his hair and thought how strange it was to feel safe beside someone she'd known only 2 days. He didn't ask her to talk, but when she did, he listened. I never planned to head north, she said quietly. I was supposed to meet my brother in Fort Benton. He sent a letter last winter, said he had work for me. But when I got there, no one had seen him. Maybe he left. Maybe. Or maybe the letter was old, and he never meant for me to come. She swallowed. I waited 5 days. Finally paid 2 men headed east to let me ride with them. I thought. She shook her head. Doesn't matter what I thought. He stirred the pot with slow, methodical turns. It matters. She watched his hands move. I don't know what happens next. You don't need to. She looked at him, the weight of his words settling deep. Why do you live out here? His eyes stayed on the pot. Because I can. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The fire popped. Somewhere across the valley, a night bird called once and went quiet. He ladled stew into 2 tin bowls and passed her one. The warmth of it settled her stomach, anchored her. You'll be safe here, he said. She met his eyes across the fire. I believe you. And she did. Without needing to know why. The next morning, cloud cover rolled in low and heavy, muting the sky to a dull pewter. The air smelled of damp pine and far-off rain. Delaney sat on a smooth boulder near the edge of the camp, sewing a torn hem on the sleeve of a shirt Soren had traded for months ago and never worn. Her needle was dull, the thread coarse, but the rhythm steadied her hands. Every so often, she glanced toward the trees where Soren had gone to check his snare lines. The camp felt different without him too still. She hadn't realized how much space he filled, even in silence. By the time she heard footsteps returning, her shoulders had gone tight. She didn't rise, but her hands stilled in her lap. He stepped from the trees with a rabbit slung over one shoulder and a limp pheasant in the other. His coat was darker with moisture, and pine needles clung to the fringe of his leggings. He knelt beside the fire pit and began to clean the birds without speaking. I patched that shirt you gave me, she said after a moment. The cuffs were nearly shredded. He looked up briefly. I never liked the way it fit. She set the needle aside. Then I'll keep it. Do. She hesitated, then stood and stepped closer, testing her weight. The swelling had gone down some, but the bruising had settled into a deep shade of violet. Can I help with anything? She asked. Hold the hide while I cut. She knelt beside him, careful of her foot, and gripped the rabbit's pelt as he made sharp, clean cuts. The blade he used had a carved bone handle, smoothed by time. She wondered who had given it to him, but didn't ask. After the meat was cleaned and hung from a stripped branch to dry, he rinsed his hands in a nearby basin and dried them on his leggings. I thought we might look at the ridge above the stream this afternoon, he said. There's a stand of chokecherry up there. If the birds haven't stripped it, there'll be enough for drying. I don't know that I've ever seen a chokecherry tree. They're small. Bitter unless boiled right. She nodded and reached for the walking stick he'd carved the day before. The handle fit her palm neatly, the bark worn smooth. She didn't ask why he'd taken the time to shape it so carefully. As they climbed, a fine mist began to fall, not enough to soak, but enough to make the rocks slick. Soren moved ahead, clearing branches with a quiet efficiency, but never too far. When she paused to catch her breath, he waited without comment. At the top, the trees gave way to a narrow plateau. The bushes were still thick with fruit, not yet picked clean by birds or bear. She reached for a low-hanging cluster and bit one. She made a face. You weren't joking. He crouched nearby, watching her. They'll sweeten a little after frost. But even then, they're work to love. Some things are worth the work. He met her eyes then, and for once, she didn't look away. A long moment passed. Then he rose and began picking. They worked in companionable quiet, filling a woven basket he'd brought. When her arms tired, she sat and watched the clouds shift above the ridge. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked. I've left before. Came back. Why? He set the basket down. There's no noise here to drown out what you carry. That can be hard. But it's honest. She picked a last cluster, rolling the stem between her fingers. I've never lived anywhere quiet enough to hear myself think. I'm not sure I know what I'd find if I did. He stood with the basket. You'll have time to find out. On the walk back, rain began falling in earnest. By the time they reached camp, both were soaked. Soren built a fire under the lean-to, and they dried their shirts by its edge. She wrapped herself again in the wool blanket and tucked her legs under her. He stirred the pot slowly, watching steam rise. I'll hunt tomorrow. There's elk sign near the foothill. She nodded. Could I come? He looked at her. You can't run if trouble comes. I can still keep watch. He considered. You'd need boots. I'll make do. He didn't argue further. That night, she lay beneath the hide covering in the shelter, listening to the wind press through the trees. Soren's silhouette moved just beyond the firelight, checking the perimeter, then settling against the trunk of a pine. She whispered into the dark. Did you love her? He didn't speak for a moment then. Yes. What was her name? Isolde. She tasted the shape of it silently. Do you still carry her? Every day. She turned her face into the blanket. I think it's harder to carry someone you never got to know well. My brother was always gone, even before he disappeared. He'd write maybe twice a year. But still, I thought he'd be there. You believed in him. I did. He shifted slightly, firelight catching the edge of his jaw. When someone leaves you like that, it makes you question all the things you counted on. Even the sound of your own name. He didn't answer, but after a while, he moved closer to the fire. I think I'm learning how to believe again, she said quietly. He looked at her then, slow and sure. So am I. And in the hush that followed, the night settled around them like a second skin thick with rain and smoke and the first thread of something neither of them had thought to find again. The morning sky was clear again, rinsed clean by the night's rain. Mist clung to the valley floor, soft and low, and the dirt paths beneath the trees were dark with water. Delaney woke to birdsong and the faint scrape of Soren sharpening his knife on a flat stone. She sat up slowly, ankle stiff but manageable, and reached for her shawl. The lean-to still held the scent of smoke and pine. Outside, the fire was already burning low, and Soren crouched beside it, blade balanced in his hands. I'll walk with you to the foothill, she said as she stepped out, her voice still rough with sleep. He didn't look up. You sure? I won't slow you. He gave a small nod and rose, sliding the knife into a sheath at his hip. We'll move quiet. Elk don't wait for noise. They set out while dew still clung to the tall grass. Delaney leaned more on the walking stick than she had the day before, but she didn't complain. Soren led them around the ridge, where the land sloped gently into a wide rise broken with scrub and stone. They walked until the trees thinned and the sun broke through in pale gold bands. Soren paused and crouched near a cluster of flattened grass, brushing his fingers over the marks. "A cow and a calf," he said. "Passed through before dawn." Delaney crouched beside him, watching the way his gaze followed the trail. "How can you be sure?" He pointed to a shallow print. "Small hooves, light weight. The cow's larger, but she's not lame. No drag in the stride." She traced the edge of the print with one finger. "Seems like magic. Only if no one tells you how to see." They moved again, slower now. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet bark and crushed leaves. Soren held up a hand and stopped. A flicker of movement caught her eye, a dark shape between two aspens, tall and still. The elk cow turned her head, ears flicking. Her calf stood behind her, legs narrow and alert. Soren knelt and lifted his rifle slowly. Delaney's breath caught. But he didn't fire. After a long moment, he lowered the barrel again. "She's nursing," he said quietly. Delaney looked at him. "You won't take her?" He shook his head. "Not yet. They'll move higher soon. There'll be others." They waited until the elk passed out of sight, then turned back through the trees. Delaney didn't speak until they were halfway to camp. "Is it always like that? Seeing something you need, but choosing to let it go?" His voice was even. "Not always. But the land remembers if you take too much." She walked beside him in silence for a while, the rhythm of her steps matching his. When they reached camp, she gathered wood while he skinned the pheasant from the day before. She watched the way he worked, precise and steady. "Did someone teach you to hunt?" she asked, sitting near the fire. "My uncle. After my father died." He didn't look up. "He taught me young. Said I needed to feed others, not just myself." "Is that why you helped me?" He paused. "No. That was different." "How?" "You weren't just hungry." She felt the words settle under her ribs, quiet and certain. That afternoon, while the meat dried and the sun climbed high, she sat on a low stump and began twisting strips of bark into cord. Soren handed her a longer blade when hers dulled. "You work with your hands like someone who's done hard things," he said, eyes on the cord. "I have," she answered. "But not all of them by choice." He nodded once. She set the cord down. "This is the longest I've stayed in one place since I left Nebraska. You don't seem restless." "I thought I'd be. But I'm not." He leaned back on his heels. "You could stay longer, if you wanted." A wind stirred the branches above them. She didn't answer right away. "What would that look like?" she asked finally. He met her eyes. "You'd have shelter. Work. No one to answer to but the land. And you?" "I'd be here." She looked at him a long while. "You don't ask for much." "I've asked for everything before." His voice was quiet. Didn't end well. She reached for the cord again, twisting bark between her fingers. "I'm not sure I know how to give anything real." "You're already giving it," he said. "You just don't see it yet." The fire cracked softly between them. A few red leaves stirred loose from a nearby branch and drifted down, brushing the edge of her shawl. "You're not what I expected," she said. "I'm not trying to be." She smiled, just a little. "Good." And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was waiting to move on. By August's end, the air turned sharper in the mornings, and the chokecherry leaves dulled to copper. Delaney stood outside the lean-to, sleeves rolled and her hair braided off her neck, scraping the hide of the elk Soren had taken 3 days before. Her strokes were even, practiced now. They worked in rhythm, he beside her, shaping arrow shafts from the straightest cuts of willow, his knife whispering through the wood. "You work quiet when your mind's full," she said, glancing his way. He didn't stop carving. "I was thinking on the roof. It won't hold once the snow starts. We could double the pitch," she offered. "If you've got 2 good beams tucked away." "I have one," he said. The other we need to fell. Spruce, maybe? You up to the saw? She nodded. I'll carry the small end. They didn't speak again until the sun dipped low behind the trees. When the last of the elk hide was stretched and pegged, Delaney wiped her hands on her apron and turned toward the slope that led down to the stream. Soren stood, cracked his back once, and followed. They sat on a flat rock above the bend, the water below moving slow and full with late summer weight. A hawk wheeled overhead, its cry cutting clean across the stillness. I saw a wagon 2 days ago, Soren said. Just past the ridge. Her body tensed without meaning to. Heading where? Southwest. Didn't stop. She exhaled, watching the wind tug at the grass. I used to count wagons, she said. Back in Nebraska. I'd sit on the porch rail just before sundown. My mother would sew, and I'd call out how many passed. I never thought I'd end up being one of them. Do you miss it? He asked. She considered. The porch, yes. The rest of it, no. He nodded once, thoughtful. She turned to him. What about you? Is there anything you'd take back if you could? He didn't answer right away. There was a rifle, he said. Passed down from my grandfather. Took it on a trade ride through Bozeman. Got jumped by 2 men with dull knives and louder mouths. I gave it up to keep my ribs. Been looking for its twin ever since. Did it shoot straight? Every time. I'd have liked to see it. He met her gaze. You've got a way of saying that, like it still might happen. I suppose I've stopped treating anything as impossible, she said. Not since I ended up here. That night, they worked on the roof. Soren set the beams while Delaney held the lantern steady, the light casting long shapes against the trees. Her hands were calloused now, her arms stronger than they'd been weeks before. When the ridgepoles settled into place and the lashings were tight, she leaned back on her heels. It'll hold, she said. He looked at her, the lantern flickering between them. You will too. She stepped down from the frame, heart thudding strange and sure. I'm not going anywhere. I know, he said. I believe you. There was no rush to the way he reached for her. His hand brushed her jaw, thumb tracing the place just below her ear. She didn't flinch, didn't step away. Her hand found his wrist, held it there. I never meant to find this, she whispered. Neither did I, he said. But I'm not letting it go. When he kissed her, it was with the care of a man who had lost too much, and the steadiness of one who meant to keep what remained. She kissed him back with all the quiet strength she'd carried since the trail, and the truth she hadn't dared speak until now, that she hadn't just found safety here, but something deeper that asked nothing of her but to stay. That winter, snow came early. They added stone to the fire pit and lined the shelter with thick hide. Delaney made new middens from the elk scraps and traded dried chokecherries to a passing trapper for 2 lengths of wool. Soren built a smokehouse with a slanted roof, and they packed it with strips of pheasant and early venison. On the shortest day, he carved a small box from pine and placed inside it the bone-handled knife she'd once carried tucked into her skirt. He gave it to her without words, and she understood it for what it was, a promise, clean and unshakable. By the thaw, the roof still held. So did they. The following spring, she planted beans along the south slope with seeds saved from a passing Lakota woman who'd traded stories for a night's warmth. Soren tilled a strip of earth with an iron hoe he'd reforged from an old trap, and together they laid out rows of potatoes, wild onions, and tobacco. They shared the work without division, no talk of what belonged to whom. When she laughed at the crows stealing the first sprouts, he built a scarecrow with a hat that used to be his. When he caught his hand on a rusted trap, she stitched it closed without shaking. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast their shadows long across the valley, he came to where she stood, hands muddy from pulling carrots. I've never asked, he said. But I will now. Will you stay every season, every year? She wiped her hands on her apron and looked at him, eyes clear. I already have. They married in the clearing behind the lean-to, with a white pine sapling planted in place of a ring. 2 passing friends stood witness, an old Dutch trader and a Metis woman who'd once midwifed on the Milk River. They brought a jar of honey and a carved bowl as a gift. Soren wore his clean buckskin shirt. Delaney wore her mother's shawl. The wind stirred the pine needles as they spoke no vows but held each other's hands, one scarred, one calloused, and let the silence speak what words could not. Years passed. The valley changed, but not them. The forest shifted with the seasons, the stream ran thinner in drier years, but the lean-to became a cabin, the garden a field. They built a stone hearth. She taught him how to write his name. He taught her the names of every bird that nested in their trees. In the evenings, they sat by the fire with their knees touching. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes not. It never mattered. Love had come without ceremony, without plan. But it stayed, deep and quiet as the roots of the pine they'd planted. And when they looked at each other across the room, or over the field, or beside the firelight, it was with the calm certainty of 2 people who had survived the worst, and built something better with their own hands. Together. Always.